All right, Alan, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking the time today and joining me today for a conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. We've been able to connect offline and chat a little bit, but I'm really excited to share your story with the listeners because I think there's a lot of wisdom to be taken out of it. But before we jump right into it, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself. Help us understand what it is that you do and what's brought you here in life.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I always try to say this not only to remind myself, but it's just important. I do not take it lightly being having the privilege and the opportunity to speak into other people's lives. 9 years ago, I started listening to podcasts and it was definitely life transforming for me, very inspiring, motivating, educating. And I do not take that lightly now that I'm on the other end of the earphones, so to speak. So thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. As for my story, the other sort of disclaimer, for lack of better phrasing, is when I do tell the story, I told you this when we did our pre-call, is it sounds oftentimes when you hear people on podcasts, it sounds like they had things figured out.
Mm.
And in reality, it's like when you're a kid and you watch a movie and then you watch it again as an adult. And as an adult, you go, oh, got it. Okay, got it. Okay, got it. And so it's gonna sound like I have this articulate narrative journey that all made sense and I figured it out, and the truth of the matter is when I was going through it and growing through it, I didn't really understand what the hell was going on, but in hindsight is 2020, I start to get it. So, just keep that in mind as I tell my story. Last piece is it's not just the message, it's the messenger, so you always gotta know who you're talking to, so I'll take you through this. So, again, didn't know this at the time, but my life definitely started in adversity, and I didn't know any different. But it's very clear now. I've done a lot of therapy in my 30s. You and I talked on the pre-call about that, and in hindsight, it was very challenging. When I was born, my father passed away in a car accident when I was 2 years old. I had an older sister who was 6 at the time, and my mother was 31 at the time, young mother of 2. And my real last name is actually McCorkle. So my birth father's name is John McCorkle, and I had a stepfather from age 3 to 14. My stepfather's Steve Lazarus, so I took his last name around, I think, age 7, and we were trying to be the Lazaruses. So the first part of my story is we didn't really talk to the McCorkles very much. It was a big Irish Catholic family, so it was John, Joe, Jim, Jane, Joan, Jeanette, 6 J's. My mum and papa. My mum is from Ireland and big Irish Catholic family. But we were being the Lazaruses, so we didn't really talk much with the McCorkles after my father passed away. So from age 3 to 14, I had a stepfather named Steve, and he worked for a company called AGFA, and he did hospital computers. And so I playfully refer to this time in my life as boats and BS. So from 3 to 14, we had snowmobiles and we had motorcycles and we had a yacht and we had ski trips and deep sea fishing. And we had a home on kind of a big pond, small lake, and we did very well. Not to mention it was the 90s, early 2000s in the US. I live in New England, grew up in New England, so Massachusetts. And back in the 90s, pretty much everybody was doing very well economically back then. The 90s were boom times. And so on the surface, everything looked great. My mom drove a BMW. We had ski trips and boats and trips and all that stuff. On behind the scenes, though, my mom and stepdad did not get along, and that's a very polite way to say it. And my mom and stepdad loved to party too, so they surrounded themselves with other people that also like to party. So at 14, my stepdad leaves my family, takes his entire extended family with him, my grandma Joan and grandpa George, my aunts and uncles. I haven't seen a single one of them since. Not one. 14, I didn't know this again until my 30s. When I reflected back, 14 was the hardest year of my life. At 14, my sister also moved out. At 14, my mom got in a fight with my aunt Sandy, her sister, and my aunt, ostracized us from that side of the family. So we don't talk to the McCorkles much at all anymore because that's my birth father's side of the family, and now we're the Lazaruses. And then the Lazaruses, they all left. And then on top of that, I don't So by the time I'm 14 years old, and again, at the time, I genuinely didn't know this, I was just figuring it out. It was just me and my mom in that big house, and I lost 3 families by the time I'm 14 years old. And my stepfather got the yacht and the apartment building. We got the house and the dog. And I went from doing very well financially, Xbox Dreamcast, early Christmas presents, boats and ski trips, and we literally had a custom made yacht being built, to now I get free lunch at school because our income is so low. And now I'm shopping at Salvation Army, and my mom traded in her BMW for a Honda Civic. And my dream ever since I was 10 years old was to go to Worcester Polytechnic Institute. It's called WPI. It's like a mini MIT. It's an engineering school, tech college, one of the best technical schools in the world, but it's really expensive. It's $50,000 a year. I know you're an engineer as well. And so I went from I can't wait to go to my tech school, my dream college. My uncle Merle was the track and field coach there. The track and field is still actually called Norcross Field, which is my uncle. And so I went from 10 years old, excited to get into my dream college, to even if I do get in, how am I going to go? It's
Right.
$50,000 a year, and this is back then. So how am I going to do this? So I did the only thing I knew how to do, and I now understand this, but at the time I didn't. My trauma response to all this pain and suffering was work harder, aim higher, get smarter. So I did. I bootstrapped. I got the President's Award. It's behind me. It's signed by George W. Bush, and it's essentially an award that is given to students who do academic excellence, and that you basically have to get straight A's through all of high school. So 16 report cards, 4 report cards per term, all 4 years. So you have to get straight A's. And at the award ceremony, I did very well, and I got tons of scholarships and financial aid, fortunately. So then I did get into WPI, and I went and I became a computer engineer, which was very challenging. Then I got my MBA, my master's in business, and then I was off to the races, quote unquote. And I went from a broke college student to doing very well in a very short amount of time. And so I went from $8 an hour painting homes in Maine. Within a 3-year period, I was making almost $200,000 a year. And so I went from 65 to 85, from 85 to 105, 105 to 125, 125 to almost 200. And I job hopped a bunch. I obviously engineers are very sought after, particularly computer engineers right now. So I was very fortunate. The companies I worked for were iRobot, Oz Developments, and SATA Technologies, which used to be Texas Instruments, Simplex Grinnell, bunch of different tech companies. I eventually land at Cognex. Cognex is a machine vision company that essentially sells manufacturing equipment into manufacturing facilities all across the world. Basically, it's the eyes of the robots, so to speak. And so I started an inside sales engineering team there. And then I was promoted to outside sales, and I managed Connecticut, Vermont, and Western Massachusetts. I'm on the road, and this is when I started making the most money I'd ever made. And at this point, I paid off $84,000 worth of college debt in a single year back in 2014. That was really my dream, was to be debt free. Yeah. And then I had $150,000 in a Vanguard investment account with all different stocks. I bought Cognex and Apple and all kinds of tech stocks and index funds and ETFs, which are the same thing. But so now I have the American dream. I have what I thought I wanted, but I'm still not very fulfilled. So fast forward, 26, and I'm playing Call of Duty with my little cousin Dan up in New Hampshire, where he lived, and we're not partying or drinking or anything. We're going to TGI Fridays Friday night. And this is back in 2015. The winter was really bad, and the snowbanks were covering the signs. And I was supposed to yield at this 3-way intersection, dark winter night, and I didn't yield. I ended up on the wrong side of the road, and then I looked up from the GPS, and I saw what I thought was a Mack truck. My computer engineering brain sized up that situation and was like, this is 100% the end. There's no possibility we survive this. Fortunately, I bought what I used to call the tank, a 2004 Volkswagen Passat, German engineered VW Volkswagen. And I used to call this the tank. It was a steel trap of a car, and that car for sure saved my life. It was not a Mack truck, it was a lift kitted pickup truck. And so it was a head-on collision, and the airbags both did deploy. My little cousin hurt his knee on the airbag, and by little cousin, he was 17 at the time. And I hurt my face on the airbag. So physically, we were okay. Very much okay, actually. But mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, I was so unreasonably messed up because my dad died in a car accident when he was 28. And so I'm 26 at the time, and this is the second chance my dad never got. And so I'm having my quarter life crisis and then some all at once, and just filled with regret. Definitely drank too much and too often. I had high school friends and college friends and corporate friends, and I was everything for everyone. And I achieved. I was an achievement oriented, improvement oriented, and I do believe I was a good person. I just wasn't self improvement oriented. I was into professional development, but I wasn't into personal development. And so I achieved a lot of things at the expense of fulfillment. And after that, I flipped the script hard, and I went all the way past broke, by the way, where I started a company about self improvement. And it's the 227 rule. It takes 2 years to go broke and get into debt, 2 years to climb out of debt in business, and then 7 years to actually be successful and profitable. And when I first heard that, I was like, not me. And that's exactly what happened. And now we're 7 years in. So that was 9 years ago. I've started a couple little companies since, and now we started what's now known as Next Level University. 7 years ago, we started a podcast together, and now we're heard in 170 countries, and we have crossed 1 million listens, and we have 21-person team and 21 departments. We've got our own charity for boys without fathers, and it's become a whole thing. It's become quite magnificent, honestly. And but I'll tell you what, it was a hell of a journey, and the shortest possible version of that very long story is prior to 26, my quarter life crisis, I was successful from the outside in. And now I'm very proud and grateful to say I'm successful from the inside out, but I'm also fulfilled as well. And so I've been successful without fulfillment, and that sucks. I've also been fulfilled without success, and I'm telling you that also sucks. So you got to have both. And that's what NLU is about. That's what I'm about, is how do you have both? How do you become ambidextrous in the 21st century?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that story and your vulnerability. I appreciate it. And I think we'll come back to this, progress through our conversation, but success is also very subjective. So I do want to unpack that a little bit. Can, I've come to the realization that contentment is within reach anytime you choose. And I think success is the same in terms of very similar to yourself. I had certain goals growing up. I've achieved them, but fulfillment wasn't there because that was a definition of success that I had aspired for much younger in life. And now success means different. And that evolves too with time. So I do want to unpack that. But just in terms of your early life, just curious, after your father left, why did you keep the same last name? Uh, just curious around that. And obviously you still kept it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something I actually have contemplated quite a bit. And I go back and forth on it, but I think it's a part of my story. A lot of people who are Greeks, Lazarus is a Greek last name. A lot of people who are Greek will say, you're not Greek. You're extremely not Greek. And blonde hair, blue eye, Greek over here. But at the end of the day, that's true. I'm actually Irish and Polish and German, and I think it's just a part of my narrative. It's a part of my story. And I think that I've considered going back, but I don't want to. And Maybe I'll change my mind one day. From a branding perspective, that would probably be a big L. So, because at this point, I'm very grateful. If you were to Google my name, you'll see some of my old fitness modeling days, but you'll also see some powerful podcast episodes. But at the end of the day, I think I just want to hold on to what I don't. I think a lot of people want to erase their past, and I certainly have felt that way at times. But I think it's made me a lot stronger. I think it's made me more compassionate. I think it's made me different and unique. And you and I talked behind the scenes a little bit about this, and I never used to talk about this because I, quite frankly, was just too cowardly. But a lot of people look at me now, and I get it. Born in the US, white Caucasian male. It does look like I was born on third base and with a silver spoon type of thing. And the truth, it couldn't be farther from the truth. And so to me, I'm the first non Greek Lazarus, and I'm going to start my own legacy. But at the end of the day, it's who I am. And I made that choice too. So the real reason I didn't change more than anything is because I remember my mom asking if I wanted to change my last name. Now, do I know for sure that she would have been okay with me saying no? But I did make that choice. And I said, yeah, let's do it. And so because it was a choice, I'm gonna stick with it. And if I
Mhm.
decide otherwise, I will change it. But I appreciate the question.
Yeah, yeah, no, thank you for that answer. And you mentioned that your biological father, unfortunately passed away tragically in a car accident when you were 2. And at 14, you experienced sudden loss. Now, at 2, you were obviously young, but as you were looking back on your life, or the sense, especially at the age of 14, with stepfather leaving and his immediate family with him, and then you mentioned your aunt on your mom's side. Now you've experienced all this loss, and we're still young at 14. Obviously, brain hasn't fully developed. As boys, we're going through a lot of changes, both physically, mentally. Was there any aspect of yourself that kind of internalized this sense of abandonment? And yes, how were you able to make sense of
Yeah, definitely. So I didn't know this at the time, but in hindsight, I do think that unlovable was probably a narrative unconsciously of why I've unpacked this in therapy. I remember there's this one time where my stepdad was fishing because we lived on a small pond, big lake, or no, big pond, small lake. And I went back into my memories and I actually started tearing up and crying about this. And I remember wondering why I love fishing. I always have. And my stepdad would go and fish alone all the time. Like in the evenings, he'd always go, fish alone. And I remember, I don't know what age I was, but I remember wondering, why doesn't he want to fish with me? Why doesn't he want to hang out with me? And I could probably tear up just talking about that because I don't think my stepdad ever really wanted kids. Uh, and that will really mess with, if I could do one thing with my birth father, I would want to go fishing. And yeah, there, without a question, there's a missing part of my heart that I've had to fulfill in other ways that other people don't have. And I try to explain this to people because the truth of the matter is, and Kev and I, so Kev's my business partner. He does Next Level University. He's the co-founder, and his father left when he was born, so he didn't know his dad until 27, and they got lunch together, and they've reconciled. But it's hard to explain to someone who has a dad because and the best way I've ever been able to do it is just picture your father. Picture every memory you have, picture the good, the bad, and the ugly, and just imagine all of that is you don't have any of that. And so you don't know what you're missing, but there's still something missing, and that's a weird duality that I can't pretend to understand.
it? Right.
And so for me, it was just achieved.
Yeah.
And so I do believe that a lot of great achievements out there are an overcorrection from abandonment. Obviously, Steve Jobs was abandoned when he was young, and I've always resonated with what Steve accomplished. And he used to be my hero, and now not so much. But I do think that when you do grow as a human being and you mature as a man, and I'll only speak for men because I'm a man, but you eventually become the male role model that you never had. And then you realize that becoming a millionaire and changing the world and all that stuff, it's still there. It's still there. You still want to do it. The difference is now you don't need to. It's this weird thing where most big, huge, audacious, crazy goals do start in pain. And hopefully on that journey, you heal along the way.
Yeah.
And it's my favorite movie of all time is The Lion King. And I think anyone would understand why. So Mufasa dies when
Yeah.
Simba's young, and the stepdad Scar, uncle in this case, and then you go back to Pride Rock and realize that you have to face your past. And for me, I've had to do that. I've actually messaged my stepdad, and I'm facing a lot of my past in so many ways, not only in therapy, but in my own life. And to answer your question, I would say without a question, there was abandonment there. And my biggest weakness in hindsight is trying to make relationships work that never should have worked. And it makes sense why, because if I was constantly afraid of more abandonment, I would manufacture and mold myself into what I needed to be. And I've never shared this publicly, but I will. I had a drinking problem and I do know why. And I was always scared to share this too. I genuinely have never shared this before publicly, at least not on a public medium. I used to drink alcohol because it made me dumber. And when I was dumber, I fit in better. I'm a computer engineering mind. I think in some ways a tortured genius, and I'm still trying to figure that out, to be honest. It's who's this self-proclaimed genius? And the last thing I'll share about this is there's a book called The Hidden Habits of Genius, and it's by a Yale professor who spent 30 years studying the geniuses of history. And by the way, many of the geniuses of history are awful human beings, FYI. So I highly recommend the book. But he unpacks the habits, the character traits of geniuses. And when I read this book, it was eye-opening for me because I saw these character traits and I'm like, oh. And in the opening of the book, he says only a non-genius would do this work because geniuses have no idea they're geniuses. They're just too
Hmm.
busy out doing genius shit. And that book for me changed the game. It's actually right behind me. And I just
Hmm.
started realizing, wow, I've always known I was super different, but I didn't really know how to put my finger on it. And instead of owning who I am, I allowed this abandonment stuff to run me, and I pretended to care about things I don't care about. I pretended to be more emotional when I'm really more logical. Everything to me is numbers, and it always
Right.
has been, always will be. And I was the obnoxious kid that could party all night and still get straight A's in calculus without going to a single class. And I used to wear that as a badge of honor, but the truth is, I have a powerful brain that I did not maximize, and now I'm hopefully making up for that.
Yeah. No, I definitely appreciate that. And you talked about duality, so I want to talk about another form of duality, which is the light and dark. And I'm referring to, I know you and I chatted about internal family systems, Carl Jung's work, integrating different parts of ourselves. Here I'm referring specifically to the shadow. And a lot of the times, shadow there comes into our lives. Often is there a form of compensation. In your case, touched on a feeling of being unlovable. The compensation was in the achievements. And it does serve people, right? That shadow side does serve you because you're able to make something out of it. You haven't figured out a healthy form of integration, then it can haunt you at times, right? And it can cause a lot of problems, it can affect your relationships. It can even affect your success because perhaps no matter what you do, you may not feel content, right? And we touched on the success part. Now, I know you shared you're doing a lot of work that personal development is a priority for you. But if you were to look in terms of where your priorities are right now, some of the work you're continuing to feel there's still this aspect of compensation that comes in from time to time, and how do you find the right balance?
Yeah, it's this weird thing where when I'm by myself, I told this to Kev because Kev didn't have a dad and he had to compensate as well, for sure. And he has a chip on his shoulder, and so do I. And I told him, I said, "We don't wanna take off the chip.
Yeah.
We just don't want the chip to run us." I said, "Run the chip, don't let the chip run you." The truth of the matter is your adversity is your advantage if you believe in yourself. If you don't believe in yourself, it actually becomes nothing short of just massively detrimental, and that's a whole nother conversation. I happen to have a ton of self-belief. I happen to turn pain into power, and I am very grateful to have been able to do that. I don't know if I could have done that without my math brain. I do have two major advantages in life that I just like to make very clear. I was born with a very powerful mind, and I was born in a country that had education and equal opportunity. And those were my two advantages. And I've since studied my past. There's not a ton of other advantages, to be completely honest, but that's true. Now, that said, does the chip come up still? Definitely. It's not the same as it used to be. It used to run me. It used to be, I need to be better. Now it's more, I want to be. I still have that I need to be, that you refer to it as the shadow. I refer to it as Achilles. So if you've ever seen Troy with Brad Pitt in 2004, Achilles, that's my, in IFS, internal family systems, they call it a firefighter. It's essentially the dark side of you that's just capable of stuff that you see this on the court, you see this in the ring, UFC people, and a side of them that they don't bring around to their families, right?
Right.
Me alone in the gym, I always say the weights aren't going to get hurt. So you better believe, do not talk to me, do not touch me, do not look at me. Me and my girlfriend, we go to the gym together. We don't talk. We do sign language. And she has her own intense version of her Achilles as well. But after that, we're back to warm and loving. And so behind the scenes, I would be getting after it. And then in front of the scenes, I'd be this softer, playful, pretend to care about things I don't care about version. And I've stopped doing that. I've started to be more confident. There's two types of confidence. I always was so confused by this because my therapist, she said, "You're so much more confident." And I remember thinking to myself, everyone always thought I was super arrogant. So I'm surprised you're saying I'm more confident now. I know what she means now. Let me explain. There's two types of confidence. One of them is confidence in your ability to achieve something. I have a lot of that. If you don't, I will trigger you. Please don't villainize me. Just sit with that. See what that means. I don't struggle with self-doubt a ton, so I'm not super relatable. I'm just going to call that out. When it comes to whether or not I can achieve XYZ, competence, courage, competence, confidence, that for me is pretty easy. Okay. But it turns out social courage for me is very low. And confidence in who I am is also fairly low. At least it was. It's starting to actually be different. And that's the difference between self-belief and self-worth. Self-belief is I can build the castle. I know I can do it. And I have always had high in that. Self-worth is I deserve to live in the castle. I will honor and protect this castle. I will set boundaries around this castle. And I've earned this. I deserve this. And that for me has been only in my 30s where I've really started to become quote unquote good enough inside myself to fully embrace that. And the best analogy I have for that, if anyone's a Harry Potter fan, when he breaks the Elder Wand at the very end and he throws it away, that's when he's finally good enough as he is. That's when he goes from the hero to the guide. And Dumbledore is no longer his hero. He has become his own hero. He's become his own guide. And so he was a victim. His parents were killed when he was a kid. And then he became the villain when he was, am I a villain? Am I not? Am I Voldemort? Am I not? There's a part of Voldemort in me. And then he had to fight that off, that inner shadow self. And then he became the hero of his own story when he was guided by Albus Dumbledore and he fought against the villain of Voldemort. And then eventually he beat Voldemort. And then when he broke the Elder Wand and threw it away, that's when he finally became good enough. And so that hero's journey that Joseph Campbell so eloquently has brought to all of us. Every book, every narrative, every movie is that. But the reason why movies resonate so deeply and why all these character archetypes resonate with different parts of us is because it's the human condition. We all have our own hero's journey. And for whatever reason, in the 21st century, we've somehow decided that we don't need to go and embark on a journey. We can just hang out and watch Netflix and simulate it, right? Without any danger to ourselves. And that's a whole nother conversation. But ultimately, to answer your question, is the chip is still there. It always will be, but it doesn't run me like it used to. And I think I'm learning how to run it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate that because from what I'm hearing from you is being able to find a way to channel that energy. And I think when we're younger, as we're entering the world and we're experiencing things, that energy can sometimes be very chaotic. And I think part of our journey in life is to figure out how to appropriately channel that energy, as you've illustrated for yourself. The other aspect there, and I'm glad you touched on the hero's journey, it's as far as the hero's concerned, there's an aspect of you go into the depths, go into the underworld, battle your demon. That's what we've been referring to in terms of the parallels with integrating your shadow, coming to face with it rather than running from it. But then once you've gone through that adventure of a life or that journey, then there's this aspect of coming back, serving as the hero. You shared got scholarships as part of the business that you're running where you're supporting other people without fathers. And from what I gather from that is that's your way of giving back. Why was that something made a part of Next Level University?
So Kevin and I, when we first started to work together, we would spend every Father's Day together because Father's Day is a day for everyone else that is usually very celebratory. And him and I ended up just hanging out every Father's Day for probably 3 or 4 years there. And Father's Day for us has always been a traditionally sad day. And so we decided that we wanted to try to turn that sad day into something fun and something special and something meaningful. More meaningful than anything. I don't know if fun is really the purpose, but meaningful. And so we started a charity where we rent out a YMCA every Father's Day and we get a bunch of kids together and we play sports. We play soccer and basketball. We get pizza. We do activities. We have arts and crafts, all kinds of stuff. And it's been going on now for, I think, this is going to be our 4th year, which is wild. And it's awesome. It's a lot of fun. And you get to be a kid again. So that's a lot of fun too.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
really, it started out as just kids without fathers, and we wanted to be male role models in a way, if we could. But now it's actually anyone with who's a single parent and who is trying to raise kids as a single parent. And it's become really special. So it's something we do every single year, and we also do a holiday event. So we have 2 events a year. It's called the Next Level Hope Foundation. We have shirts, and it's on our website. And twice a year we do Father's Day, and we do December, usually around 18th, whatever the weekend before Christmas. And we have a holiday event and a Father's Day event every year. And the reason why we started that is how do you turn something painful into something meaningful? And to me, that's the best lesson in life is how do you turn something painful into something meaningful? Because I think a lot of people, they believe life, for some people that I would associate with in my past, you could tell that they didn't suffer in the way that I did. Some of us grow up very spoiled, some of us don't. And some of us experience death early, some of us don't. Some of us experience pain early and some of us don't. Some of us have a lot of trauma, some of us don't. We all have adversity, but it's the frequency, intensity, density, and duration is very different. And so there's something called an ACE score, adverse childhood experiences, and I'm on the very, very high end of that score. And I didn't know that until I started therapy and researching this stuff and realizing, oh, even though deep down I always knew, deep down, but then you get validation later. And so anyways, I would hang out with these other people that didn't have to go through what I went through, and I would notice they have a huge disadvantage. And the disadvantage is that they believe life is supposed to be good. And I disagree with that. I think that life is deeply painful. I think life is adversity. I think the human condition is inherently a lot of suffering. And I think that despite that inevitable fact, you can make it meaningful and fulfilling. Whereas most people, not most, but a lot of people, particularly in the 21st century, I think they believe life is supposed to be good. So whenever it's not, they think something's wrong. I don't think anything's wrong. When life sucks, I don't think anything's wrong. I'm just grateful that it doesn't always suck. And so we all have this metaphorical ladder, and you mentioned how contentment is created by your own consciousness. I think that we all have a set point, and unfortunately for what I thought was a huge disadvantage, not having a father, losing my stepdad, losing 3 families by the time I'm 14, has actually become a huge advantage. And the reason why is because everything's gravy, baby. At this point, I've got nice clothes, I've got food in my fridge, my girlfriend and I never fight. We have this beautiful home. I work from home. I we share a car. I don't need that much. I needed all I ever wanted was simple. All I ever wanted was peace and tranquility and simple. And so for me, I just noticed that became a huge advantage because I don't have to spend a ton of money on a bunch of nonsense. I don't need like a Ferrari to be happy. And I just think that anyone who's out there, if you've ever read Viktor Frankl's A Man's Search for Meaning, I do
Mhm.
believe it's one of the most impactful books in history. I've read it 50 plus times, genuinely. And Viktor Frankl's a genius for sure, by the way. But and it's by the way, for the women out there, it's called A Man's Search for Meaning, but it means mankind. I don't want you to be turned off by the title because my girlfriend was turned off by the title, understandably. But it means mankind, and it's not a sexist book whatsoever. It's a
Right.
wonderful book. And so Viktor Frankl went through Auschwitz and he went through all the different concentration camps and he went through more suffering than any of us can imagine. And yet he still found fulfillment and purpose. And to me, that's my level set. I like to watch certain movies like Hotel Rwanda or these different movies that get me to realize how blessed I am and how fortunate I am. Because yeah, I worked a 12-hour day today. Yeah, that sucked. Yeah, I want to go hang out right now and not be on this podcast. But it doesn't matter. You need to level set yourself. I think true humility is remembering where you came from, and it's remembering that there's a lot of suffering in the world, despite what Instagram shows. And everyone behind the scenes, I'm a coach. I've coached dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of people. I'm coming up on my 10,000 hours of podcasting, speaking, coaching, training. And I'm telling you right now, all different cultures, all different backgrounds, all different countries, it's very clear to me at this stage with all the data I have that everyone behind the scenes is struggling more behind the scenes than they show in public. There's very few exceptions where their life is actually better behind the scenes than shown publicly. I believe I am to be one of those exceptions, but the truth of the matter is the only reason why that is because I finally cut the show out at 26 and actually started focusing on the real fundamentals behind the scenes that actually bring real fulfillment. And so I
Right.
am more fulfilled than anyone like the way I used to be is. And the reason why, ironically, is because I'm not focused at all on any shiny objects anymore. And so the ironic thing is you got to get the shiny objects in order to realize they're not the answer. And so I had to do that too. I had ego driven goals for sure. I wanted to make 6 figures out of college and I wanted to drive a nice car and I wanted to have the hottest girlfriend and I did all that. My girlfriend in my mid 20s was a supermodel level. It it didn't do it. It didn't do it. The only thing that's going to do it is growth, contribution, and a high quality of life based on fulfillment and based on your unique version of yourself. And if you
Right.
can build a life and design a life of meaning despite how awful and hard life is, that's where all the gold is.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. And just to expand on Viktor Frankl, despite all the suffering, he also found purpose, something to live for, right? That whether or not you question his hope of meeting his family on the other end, if you were to survive, he didn't meet them, but he still survived. He had a why, right? That's it always, whenever I think about that, the Nietzsche thing around he who has a why can bear the how, right? And there's something deeply profound about that. But you also touched on confident side of things, right? Forms of confidence. And the latter, as you said, thing that you had to work on. Me, what I internalize there, the sense of self-love, knowing that you're worthy. Because there are things, right? In your example, you said, have the capacity and the ability to put your mind to something, build the castle. Afterwards, do you feel worthy enough to live? How has that now come through for you? Because touched, just to come full circle, we touched on the early life experiences where there was a sense of maybe I'm not worthy of love. That's why I've been abandoned. And then in order to heal this love, I'm going to go through all these achievements. Now, after all these experiences, how's that full circle for you?
So, the greatest gift of my life, the best decision I ever made was going to WPI. The second best decision I ever made was leaving my ex-girlfriend. The third best decision I ever made was DMing my beautiful girlfriend now, Emilia.
Yeah.
She is without a question the greatest gift of my life. And the thing that I need to make very clear to everyone about that is, to answer your question, is I see us as an infinity symbol. I actually coach couples with her, and we see infinity symbols. It's feedback loops between couples, right? You can always tell when two people are connected and when they're not, despite what the Instagram photo shows.
Right.
And energetically. And she and I, when we first got together 5 years ago, it was very different than anything I'd ever experienced. And I told her, I said this intuitively, which is interesting to look back on. I said, I'm going to teach you the external world. You're going to teach me the internal one. And that's been very true. She's been studying therapy modalities since she was 13 years old. And I'm not exaggerating. She's actually embarrassed to talk about it because she's so weird. And I'm just helping love her weird and just own your weird. Because I've been studying the economy since I was a kid. And we all have this gifting. We all have a natural inclination, a gift, a calling, a purpose, whatever it is, a direction that we are just naturally intrigued by. So I've always been naturally intrigued by the human condition. I've always been naturally intrigued by business and how it works and finance and science and technology. Where did that all come from? Was it conditioning? Was it nature? Was it nurture? I don't know. Was it both? With her, to answer your original question, she taught me the inner world stuff. And if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't even have a therapist. She was the one who said, she didn't say, Alan, you're broken, you need fixing. None of that. It was, I've been doing therapy since I was 12. You don't understand what you're missing. And I was like, okay. And there was one therapist in particular I needed it to be. So she also had gone to WPI because I know my math brain. And if it's not someone who's really brilliant, it's going to be hard for me to let them speak into my life. And because I've had a lot of mentors and coaches, right? Who in hindsight, you ever had a coach or a mentor where in hindsight, every time you get older and more mature and more aware, you have certain heroes that are just like, oh, you had no idea. Oh, you had no idea what you're talking about. And then there's other ones where it's like, oh, you knew some stuff. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So remember, as you get older and wiser, be honest with yourself. You got to reflect back and go, oh, you never should have been my mentor or my guide.
Yeah.
Wowza. So again, maybe that's a me issue, but that's why I mentioned what I mentioned about the therapist thing. So I got a therapist because of Emilia. I've done a lot of inner work because of Emilia, and we coach couples. And when we're coaching couples, it's mostly her doing the coaching and I'm transcoding. So I'm helping it land because she's one of those people. It's if I were to try to teach mathematics to someone who's a beginner, it's very hard for me to articulate things in a way that lands for someone at the beginning. It's like Michael Jordan trying to teach basketball. He's going to be like, what do you mean you can't 360 dunk from the foul line? For her and we coach couples, and I am learning through that. And when I learn through that, I realize it's my mirror of I need to do that work too. And so, full transparency, I've forgotten the original question. But I think the point that I wanted to make is that I was externally driven, and that is why I was unfulfilled. And I don't believe that you can be fulfilled without inner work. I just don't. And the inner work is not shiny. It's not flashy. You can't brag to your friends about it. It's not going to get you a new car. And if it actually is going to get you a new car, but you're not going to be able to tie it to the inner work.
Right.
You're just going to feel different. And then you're going to see the world differently. And then you're going to react to the world differently. And then you're going to get new results, but you're not going to be able to tie it back most likely. And so the inner work is sometimes people's obsession, and they actually need to learn the economy. And other people who understand science, technology, engineering, mathematics, business, and finance, they actually need to do the inner work. And so you happen to be one of the few engineers that I know that I think is such a huge advocate for therapy. I often joke, I say, guys can't even ask for directions, never mind get a therapist.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Yeah, and you mentioned that Steve Jobs, his story definitely resonated for you, and see a lot of similarities, like his obsession with what he made Apple, and then obviously what he did with Pixar too. But you also mentioned that no longer your hero. What changed for you, and what did you see in his life that you didn't want to have in yours?
What a great question, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, so the achievement and the doing of what is seemingly impossible is something that I did see that I think that I respect and admire, and I quite frankly adore about Steve. But when you study his life, it's very clear that he did not take his health seriously. It's very clear that was arrogant, in my opinion. Again, this is my opinion, and it's easy to sit over here and judge him. But what I will say is that we're all a warning and an example, and I would just say he's a warning for many things. And I've been contemplating my entire adult life, really. Is it possible to achieve what he achieved without also being a dick? And I've been trying to figure that out for my entire adult life, and I think it's possible. I do. I actually think it's possible to achieve even more. But of course, I need to think that in order to try to do it, right? So
Right.
health, wealth, and love is our thing. And there's a reason most people are not all three. Each one of those categories, just being really healthy is actually a full-time job. Just being in love and cultivating and sustaining true love, a really loving, intimate, long-term partnership is also a full-time job. And then wealth, are you kidding me? It takes I track finances every day. I'm the CFO of our company, and down to the $3.28 that Kevin got a coffee. And so the reason why most people are healthy and wealthy but not in love, or maybe they're in love and healthy but not wealthy, or maybe one of all three, is because it's statistically very challenging. And I'll break the math down very quickly. I know we got to jump. So if you're 1 in 1,000 health, so let's say there's 1,000 sample set, random 1,000 people in the world, and you're 1 in 1,000 health, and 1 in 1,000 love, 1 in 1,000 wealth, that's 1 in a billion. So you're actually 1 in a billion statistically. And that's how the math works of probabilities. To go back to the Steve Jobs thing, I couldn't do that. I was on my way to doing that, trust me, very unhealthy before 26. But I decided I can't do what he did. I don't want to take my health for granted. The dude would still be here if he took his health seriously. And I can't guarantee that, of course, so please don't quote me on that. But it's very, very clear that he never prioritized his health to the extent that he could have or should have. And that is my opinion. Please do not post this anywhere. But what I will say is I knew that I wanted to be a more well-rounded, holistic, positive version of myself. I wanted to be a leader who leads by example. And really underneath it, that's the answer. The real question is the reason I don't call him my hero anymore is that he didn't lead by example. He was a male role model. He was a male role model for me, and he let me down. And the reason he let me down is because of the way he treated people and because he did not lead by example when it comes to a holistic, rounded, positive life. And again, everyone is imperfect, including myself, but I'm going to try to do a hell of a lot better than that. And that's my truth.
Yeah, yeah, and I think to your point, based on what I read when I read his biography by Walter Isaacson, and that was one of the things I interpreted was we talked about having that chip on your shoulder. I just felt like didn't really integrate that shadow, and he struggled with forgiveness, which probably also led to some of the consequence he experienced. One last question. I know I don't want to be too long, but this might be a tough one. And I'm just curious because I'm always wondering about these things. But say biological father were here, uh, what do you think he would say to you, and what would you think?
I think he would say, you did a hell of a lot better than I did. And I think he would say, I'm blown away by who you've become. And he'd probably tell me to forgive more and maybe do a better job at leadership with my family. Because I think he knows that he would have liked to have done a better job as well. So I think that's what he would tell me. And I appreciate the courage it takes to ask that. I really do. And yeah, you want to talk about the deepest questions. Fortunately, I've asked myself some of these questions behind the scenes before this interview, right?
Yeah.
But but the truth of the matter is, yeah, I think he'd be unbelievably blown away. I really do. And at the end of the day, if you can't authentically look in the mirror and be blown away by yourself, you're leaving some potential on the table. And before 26, I would never have been able to be proud of me because I was leaving so much potential on the table. I was not maximizing my brain. I was not maximizing my brain health. I was not maximizing my physique or my fitness health. I was not leading by example. I was not the male role model I would have needed. I was not the male role model I wanted. And now I honestly can say that I am. And I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going because I still got a lot of potential in me for sure. For sure.
Mhm.
And I'm excited. So yeah.
No, I appreciate that, Alan. Thank you so much for sharing so much of your story with us today and being so open and honest. Uh, Appreciate it. I know the listeners will really appreciate it. But any final thoughts, anything you would like to share? How can listeners find you? How can they learn about the work you're doing? What are some ways to find some of that information?
Appreciate it. And thank you for having me. Like I said, I do not take it lightly to have the opportunity to speak into people's lives. I wish that this self improvement oriented stuff was more popular. I used to say, I hope self improvement spreads like COVID. And then my business partner said, that's probably not the best thing to say. But the truth is, I do. I hope self improvement spreads. I really do. I don't wish ill upon anyone, but I hope self improvement spreads as quickly as COVID did. And that's the goal. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it. As for where you can find me, you can Google my name. I will come up on a bunch of stuff. We have a website called nextleveluniverse.com. Next Level Universe, not university. The podcast is Next Level University. Both are spelled just like it sounds. You can email me, ALAN, at nextleveluniverse.com. Like all of us, I get a lot of spam emails, so please provide context if you do email me. I do business coaching. We have a book club. We do monthly meetups. We do all kinds of stuff. We've got a group coaching program every quarter. And again, all of that's at nextleveluniverse.com. And then any parting words, the only thing I would say is No matter how hard your past has been, no matter how hard your present is, you have a spotless future. And you can make it bigger, better, and brighter by putting in work today. Self-belief plus humility. Self-belief plus humility. Believe in what is possible and have the humility to put in the work. None of this work smart, not hard crap. Put in the work and it will be worth it because of who you become and because of what you contribute. And work smart too, but ironically, you'll only work smart after you beat your head against the wall for many years.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. No, I appreciate it. Thank you again, Alan. Pleasure.
You as well. Thank you.